Season 19 and the Witch Queen era have come to a close. Today we will reflect on this season and the year as a whole. Season 19, tiny bit shorter than most other seasons, coming in at just under 3 months. Typical season is about 3 months. Let's start with the story. This section is going to be a bit longer than usual because there is a lot of story, but also, as usual, this is going to be a summarized version of the events. Lore, not exactly my department, but I'm doing what I can. Season 19 story is all about Rasputin. Rasputin is back, but he's barely hanging on. Anna Bray saved a little chunk of Rasputin in an engram and has been trying to throw him into an exobody, but she's struggling. It is suggested that she needs Clovis Bray's help in order to do the thing that she wants to do, which she isn't too happy about. Osiris is also back, thanks to the end of last season, who gets visions of a Neptunian city from Savathun due to the events of last year, where Savathun had been secretly controlling Osiris. Osiris wants the location of this potential city on Neptune, even after some agents already went to Neptune and found nothing. Osiris, not exactly the biggest fan of Osiris in the past, but now wants him back for Neptune-related questioning. We head over to Clovis as we take down the Hive that have invaded the laboratory, who are trying to figure out a way to control Clovis. We clear them out and we throw Clovis into an engram after he agrees to help, although we'll come to learn that it's not exactly out of the goodness of his own heart, but rather his desire for self-preservation and keeping his legacy alive. The bulk of the season revolves around the fight against Zevorath's forces, from controlling the Warmind or the Warset, one of those, the Warmind or the Warsets, it's one of them. The Warmind is basically a giant satellite type network comprised of Warsats used to defend a planet with giant laser beam weapons. They're infiltrating Seraph bunkers, we need to stop them, while simultaneously trying to restore Rasputin by gathering submines or submine backups from older vaults so that he can regain control of the Warsat network before Zevorath does. The Scorner also involved, being used via the Witness to get more submine data. As we get to Malahayati, which is the first submine we interact with, it is protected by one of Aramis's old captains, revived as a Scorn, leading to the idea that Aramis is being punished and controlled by the Witness for her failings in the events of the previous season by having her old house essentially turned into zombies. We then learn that Clovis thinks he should become the new Warmind, so to speak, instead of Rasputin, because he thinks he would be better at it and that it might be better under their collective control versus giving it back to Rasputin. We go to Mars, recover more data, and the follow-up mission gets us the launch codes needed to access the orbital station, and control over the orbital station means control of the Warsats. We eventually decrypt the launch codes, which brings us to the orbital station, aka Seraph Shield, aka Revision 0. And what a surprise, splicers have already gotten to the station and we need to clear them out. We get to the terminal needed to upload a virus that would allow Clovis to control the network. Rasputin is still not ready at this point to be reconstructed. We then go to the Iron Temple to recover Fellspring, who was Fellwinter's ghost. Fellwinter was created as a duplicate, sort of Rasputin, with the goal of experiencing the world so that Rasputin can get a better grip on humanity as a whole. Anna thinks that Fellspring could have valuable Rasputin-based data that we could use to restore him. The plan is a success, and Rasputin speaks with us about how Clovis Bray originally built Rasputin purely as a weapon to blow up the Traveler, and then Clovis would take its place, where Clovis would have the final say as he maintained control over Rasputin. This didn't happen because Anna Bray taught Rasputin to think for himself, taught him about life and humanity and Cheez-Its, whatever else there is. Rasputin locked out Clovis from controlling him before the collapse, going dormant after those events. Clovis wants to become the new Warmind, and wouldn't you know it, doesn't happen. He confesses that he thinks he'd be best for humanity. Instead, we delete the copy of Clovis that we got from week 1 from the exoskeleton and upload Rasputin in his place. Osiris is immediately on Rasputin's case about the Neptunian city, but Rasputin is like, dude, I literally just got restored. Give me a few minutes, aka I'll see you next week. The Phase Nephele Stronghold, which was revealed as early as last year via the evidence board, comes up in the search results, confirming Osiris's suspicions that Rasputin may know something about Neptune. The theory was that Rasputin deleted these files during the collapse to give humanity another go at humanity so that no one would know should the data end up getting collected from Rasputin. But there could be data on other submines about Nepheli Stronghold, so we continue to gather more data. We find out that Xivu Arath is going to try to attack the city and use the war mines against us because killing stuff would simply fuel her power, leading to a mass hive summoning ritual, as the hive do. But the problem is that if they don't use the warsats to defend themselves, they might get overrun. As the season concludes, Aramis gains control to the Seraph Station and tries to take control of the warsats to destroy the Traveler because she's all like, if I can't have it, nobody can. And then the Traveler starts to leave and then he stops. Anna Bray uploads Rasputin to the Warsat network, and Rasputin initiates a self-destruct sequence, deleting himself and blowing up the network and all of the Warsats. And the witness is like, yo, I saw you venting, that's sus, I'm calling an emergency meeting, and starts the invasion process as we move into Lightfall. That was a much denser summary than I was anticipating doing. That is my bad. Overall, I definitely enjoyed this season's story, but as every season that leads into an expansion goes, it gets an inherent advantage over the other seasons because it leads into an expansion. The expansion stories are the most engaging, and anything that is linked to them usually gets a lot more attention. What also helped the season story was the fact that it didn't really feel like we had that many burner weeks, or weeks where we didn't get any sort of big development. Most weeks felt pretty engaging overall. There weren't many times where I felt like nothing was happening in a given week and we just had to go get a MacGuffin. As I mentioned in the first impressions, I was never a huge fan of Rasputin because he was too nebulous. It was too mysterious and very aloof. Getting a little bit of backstory to Rasputin, how he came to be, the history with Clovis Bray, answered a lot of questions from the collapse era of Destiny, and I personally liked finding out a bit more about Rasputin in this way. It's definitely a little bittersweet to see Rasputin go, since he's been a part of the franchise for such a long time, but at the same time, since I wasn't a huge Rasputin enjoyer to begin with, I'm not too torn up about it. It does feel like another situation of Bungie tying up loose ends before the end of this era of the story is over. Season 14 had a similar feeling where they killed off Lakshmi of the Future War Cult and said the other factions scattered across wherever the hell they are as a way to tell the community, hey, stop asking about factions. This is not necessarily the same situation, obviously, but more of a question of whether or not Rasputin was going to be a part of the grand plan for the story as we push towards a conclusion, and it looks like the answer ended up being no. Leaving him alive maybe introduces too many questions or plot holes, what have you, and Bungie just wanted to take it in a certain direction, but his death does ultimately feel like it ended up making sense within the story, especially given the events of the finale. Again, this is from my Datto non-lore master perspective. Again, lore masters, feel free to chime in. As someone who is not exactly the greatest critic of entertainment, I enjoyed the story experience from this season. It was satisfying, it answered a lot of questions, there was tension, I wanted to know what was going to happen next, and it all led to the finale event, which brings us into Lightfall. The finale event was pretty awesome as well, the first time we've really seen the Traveler do anything in such a manner. The cutscene was great. Overall, as someone not super deep in the lore, I had a really fun time this season. The seasonal activity was Heist Battlegrounds, which was a 3-player match-made piece of content. Enemy density was pretty good, and the activity was well within the bounds of what should be expected of a seasonal activity. But this is the first time that Bungie has experimented with level caps within a seasonal activity. It didn't matter what your power level was, you would always be slightly underleveled in the activity, and this was to make things a little more combat intense and kept the combat experience consistent during the season. I enjoyed this very much, as I feel like my builds tend to lose a lot of meaning when things die very easily. It's pointless, or it feels pointless, to go build craft and spend all this time when you can just use the worst armor and weapons in the game and still just stomp everything in your path. Bungie ended up liking this change so much that they have essentially retooled difficulty and level scaling in most activities going into Lightfall, on top of not increasing the power cap in what will end up being Season 21. This has led to speculation of an overhaul of the leveling system within Destiny come final shape time, with Bungie planning on making adjustments over the next year. We've spoken many times about leveling at this point, so I'm not going to dig too deep, but leveling is not something that I think you can just rip straight out of the game and everything will be okay. There needs to be a strong plan in place first. The currency system in Season 19 was a bit simpler than last season, where all you had were Seraph key codes, which were used to open a chest at the end of a battleground. I only experienced a shortage of these key codes early in the season before I had a lot of the upgrades. In the second half, I basically never had a problem with this currency, and I think keeping it simple is always going to be for the best at this point. Umbral energy this season did feel a little more scarce than I wanted it to be, given that the big chunks of it came from an activity that took about 12 to 15 minutes to complete, and you often needed to do multiple runs to be able to afford one weapon. Seraph Shield was the exotic mission of the season, getting us Revision 0, a pulse rifle that could be crafted and adjusted with different perks as you collected catalysts. This wasn't just a random mission though, as it linked into the storyline in a pretty significant way, as mentioned earlier. The mission itself was a pretty fun day one experience, and I think the response to this mission as a whole was pretty good. A little bit of puzzle solving, a little bit of combat, a little bit of platforming, a little bit of everything, including 50 collectibles to go gather, which unlocked the Good Boy protocol in the helm, aka you got an NPC doggy to pet in the helm, which I think people thought was fun. I thought it was fun. I thought it was cute. The dungeon isn't technically a part of the season, but it did come out with Season 19, so we will talk about it briefly. What saved this dungeon from going towards the bottom tier of dungeons for me was the final boss fight being more satisfying to do than something like the Keitel encounter. The whole connect the dots mechanic wasn't the most engaging, and combined with the fact that the second encounter is basically one of the Garden of Salvation bosses, I was initially not the most enthused, but with an intense final boss fight that improved upon something that I didn't enjoy that much about Duality's final boss, which were 4 to 5 to 6 minute setups to get to a damage phase that could end in 10 seconds, I ended up having a pretty good time with it, even though the day one experience had quite a lot of server issues. All of the Light 3.0 subclasses are out at this point, so there isn't a big section for me to discuss this aspect of the game. The seasonal artifact this season had Loosened Finisher for power, ammo, spawning, and Weakened Clear, a neutered version of Breach and Clear from several seasons ago. We also had Monochromatic Maestro, which just sort of boosted your builds even more. Nothing really too game-changing in terms of build crafting came from the mods this season. Most of them just enhanced the things that you were already doing. Season 20 is going to be launching with some absolutely crazy mods and builds that we'll discuss after Lightfall launches, since I didn't have a time to do a video on those mods. We'll also discuss how I think Bungie is indirectly trying to teach people about build crafting through the seasonal mods, but also what worries me about the setup of the Season 20 artifact mods for builds going into the future. Ikelos weapons made a return this season, with the Ikelos SMG being one of the top primary weapons in the entire game across all modes. We had a batch of seasonal weapons as well, with Retrofit Escapade having a short-lived career thanks to volatile rounds proccing a little bit too often, swiftly getting fixed before things got out of hand. The rest of the weapons aren't too bad. They're pretty fine, with Judgment of Kelgarath, the glaive, getting a new perk called Close to Melee, which probably makes it the best legendary glaive available now. The exotic weapon of the season was the Manticore, experimenting with a weapon with airborne capabilities. This had not a ton of buzz pretty much in all aspects of the game, although I do think it is an interesting weapon as a whole. It's just generally not the best idea to be in the air in PvE. It can catch people off guard in PvP. I don't think it is necessarily a garbage weapon or anything like that, but when something like Funnel Web exists and does the job well enough for the average situation, you can often use your exotic slot on something else. One of the best changes that Destiny has ever gotten also happened this season, about midway through. Blues no longer drop when you're at the power cap. I don't have anything else to say on this other than thank you so much. What a massive quality of life improvement. I didn't do a video on the Dawning this year, as it is still pretty much The same premise as it has been. You make the cookies, you deliver the cookies. Here, have a cookie. Oops, you tossed your cookies. Then, is anyone going to get that reference? Then you do dawning related things. However, I did remember seeing a decent amount of praise for the event from the community. I don't remember Star Baker being too annoying to go guild, at least not as annoying as the Festival of the Lost title was, but I didn't end up making any dawning-based content, so I don't really remember too much about it, other than it was the dawning. You know, it's the dawning. I know this feels like a lot shorter of a recap than usual, but that's really all that happened this season. It was a really well-liked season overall, as seasons before expansions tend to go. Bungie finally acknowledged one of the key issues people were having about the seasonal model, in that things were getting a bit stale, but we're going to have to wait a couple more seasons to see the fruits of that feedback start to pop out. Conversation on that has died down for the time being as people are getting excited for Lightfall, but I fully anticipate having that same Witch Queen whiplash where the Witch Queen ended up being so good and then people realize that they have to go straight back to the same seasonal content pace after it's all over. Which kind of brings me to closing thoughts on the year overall. I had started writing a Datto's Thoughts going into 2023 video, but after that big State of the Game post came out and after I realized that I did the going into 2022 video after Witch Queen, not before it, it didn't really make sense to make it just yet. And maybe I still will make it, I don't know. But the main gripe that I had in the 2023 video that I wrote was that combat was kind of a joke. That was the number one point I was going to make in that video in terms of what I wanted to see improved for 2023. Of course, seasonal content needing a shakeup was there too, but both of these things have been acknowledged, even if I think the Season 20 artifact mods are going to almost completely negate any sort of nerfs that we're going to be receiving going into Lightfall. But in terms of the year as a whole, well, it was basically 2021 again. Weapon crafting got completely retuned over the course of the year, the subclasses got retuned, just a lot of quality of life stuff. And that trend is continuing into Lightfall. 2021 and 2022 have been the most consistent years of Destiny in terms of content in the history of the franchise because Bungie has really dialed in on what Destiny is and is going to be until the final shape. They're taking the things that they have now and they're just making them better. They're refining, they're streamlining. Innovation is coming in this form. Now, we've had the innovation conversation in the past back around the Beyond Light era where I said that more Destiny wasn't going to be enough anymore, that things need to evolve. I would say that the campaign experience has evolved, but now we're waiting to see if seasonal content gets shaken up in a way that is accepted by the community. It's something like making the story better, innovation. Is putting loadouts or an LFG system in-game, innovation. Is a quality of life upgrade, innovation. I don't know. It's kind of tough to label. Can you innovate when it seems like the goal is consistency? When it's not broken, when the gameplay is not broken, spare me with the leveling talk, when something's not broken, how do you fix it? Obviously, not everything in the Destiny world is in tip-top condition. But again, Destiny as a whole knows what it is, and it knows what it wants to be. And I hope that Bungie can do more stuff that feels more like innovation. Quality of life stuff is great, but if we didn't have loadouts in game, I would keep using Destiny Item Manager. You know what I mean? Maybe there isn't as much room to innovate as I think, but if there's something that I think Bungie could do over the next year, it's just try some stuff. You know, if it doesn't work out, okay. I know some people might be scared of that, maybe scared of another Gambit situation. Maybe so is Bungie. They'd rather play it safe, or maybe they're just waiting until Final Shape to get weird. I don't know. But if Bungie has some weird stuff that they want to try, yeah, I'd say try it. I'm not talking about player housing and ship battles, you know, like some people have been suggesting over the past few years. That's out of scope. Gameplay stuff. Someone's got a weird idea, try it out. Okay, I think we'll just cut it there. I'm kind of rambling at this point. Hopefully you get what I mean with that whole paragraph that I just said. Regardless, thank you very much for watching, and Lightfall, here we come.